If you've survived a narcissistic relationship, taking care of yourself isn't simply about wellness. It can become an act of reclaiming your life. Listen, kale smoothies and meditating over crystals are going to take a backseat to psychological survival. There's no crystal big enough to make this go away. Traditional wellness advice can be valuable, but it often assumes you have control over your time, energy, and environment. Getting enough sleep, eating nourishing food, moving your body, and reducing stress all matter. But knowing what is healthy and being able to practice it are two very different things. For someone living with narcissistic abuse, the environment itself can make ordinary self-care extremely difficult. Think about the structure of many narcissistic relationships. The moment you express a need, disagree, or do something for yourself, you may suddenly become the problem. You may be called selfish, demanding, ungrateful, difficult, dramatic, or unreasonable. Sometimes there is no argument at all. Disapproval comes through silence, contempt, withdrawal, criticism, or guilt. Over time, this becomes conditioning rather than an occasional conflict. You learn that having fewer needs creates fewer problems, and that keeping everyone else comfortable keeps the relationship stable. Eventually, you may start believing that becoming smaller is the price of keeping the relationship alive. This pattern can begin in childhood, when a narcissistic parent teaches a child to monitor rather than simply be. The child learns to notice moods, choose carefully when to speak, and anticipate what someone else wants. They learn when confidence is acceptable and when they need to make themselves smaller. For a child, adapting is often about attachment and safety rather than choice. Similar patterns can appear in adulthood when someone explains away unhealthy behavior as ordinary compromise. They remember the good moments, minimize the difficult ones, and tell themselves that certain issues are not worth fighting about. Little by little, they adjust themselves until they barely recognize how much of their identity has been surrendered. The same pattern can appear in friendships, families, and workplaces. You become the person who keeps everything functioning and anticipates everyone else's needs. You manage schedules, solve problems, do things you dislike, and avoid saying what you truly think. You stop sharing your dreams because there never seems to be room for them. You become intensely focused on everyone else while gradually disappearing from your own life. Sometimes this is genuine survival because people may not have safe alternatives. But when your needs, interests, values, and aspirations have nowhere to exist, you can slowly lose touch with yourself. That's one reason narcissistic relationships can feel like a full-time job. There is always something to manage, anticipate, explain, or emotionally regulate. Then, traditional wellness advice tells you to prepare healthy meals, exercise, meditate, sleep properly, and create a perfect morning routine. But what happens when taking 20 minutes for yourself creates conflict? You might be criticized for exercising, eating differently, going to bed earlier, spending money, or simply wanting rest. Eventually, avoiding the conflict can feel easier than taking care of yourself. The problem isn't always that you lack discipline. Sometimes your environment is actively interfering with your ability to care for yourself. This is something many wellness conversations overlook. A harmful relationship can profoundly interfere with physical and emotional well-being. Even sleep can become difficult when your mind is replaying betrayal, manipulation, gaslighting, arguments, and confusion. You cannot simply command yourself to stop thinking when your brain is trying to understand what happened. Meditation does not automatically erase relational trauma or years of chronic stress. Conflict can disrupt sleep. Emotional exhaustion can make exercise feel impossible. And constant demands can interfere with appointments and responsibilities. Repeated devaluation can even make you question whether your own health deserves to be prioritized. You may begin asking yourself, who am I to take this time for myself? You may wonder whether you are selfish or whether you really deserve to have needs. Those thoughts matter because narcissistic abuse can create deep self-devaluation. Consider how much energy can be consumed by angry messages from an ex-partner, difficult co-parenting, guilt-inducing relatives, or unreasonable demands from a boss. That emotional labor consumes the mental bandwidth needed for ordinary life. When psychological survival becomes the priority, perfectly planned meals and elaborate wellness rituals naturally move down the list. So we need a different way of thinking about wellness for people affected by narcissistic abuse. The conventional advice is not necessarily wrong. Food matters, movement matters, sleep matters, breathing matters, and meaning and purpose matter. But the path toward those things can be much harder after relational trauma. It becomes especially difficult when attempts to prioritize yourself are met with criticism, shame, or retaliation. Calling survivors lazy, unmotivated, or codependent ignores the environment in which they are trying to function. If someone has to hide a workout to avoid conflict, that is not simply a motivation problem. If setting a boundary repeatedly leads to punishment or intimidation, telling someone to just set boundaries ignores the reality they are facing. Sometimes the safest form of wellness is quiet wellness. Small things that belong to you and do not need to become another source of conflict can still matter. You do not have to transform your entire lifestyle overnight or create the perfect morning routine. You may not be able to exercise every day, prepare elaborate meals, meditate for an hour, or get 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep. Instead, look for small opportunities that fit the reality of your life. Take a short walk. Stretch for a few minutes. Drink water. Keep nutritious snacks available, or make one healthier choice when you can. Small acts of care still count, especially when your circumstances make larger changes difficult. And perhaps most importantly, be compassionate with yourself. There will be days when you are triggered, exhausted, overwhelmed, or emotionally drained. You may eat comfort food, skip the walk, sleep badly, or choose the easiest option available. That does not mean you have failed. The way you speak to yourself during difficult moments may matter more than maintaining a flawless wellness routine. Recovery does not require perfection, and a difficult day does not erase the progress you have made. Sometimes surviving the day with a little more kindness toward yourself is an important form of self-care. Another important strategy is protecting your wellness efforts from people who may use them against you. You do not necessarily need to announce that you are exercising or explain every change you make. You do not need someone else's approval before deciding that your health matters. If someone repeatedly criticizes your attempts to improve yourself, giving them more information may simply give them more opportunities to undermine you. They may mock your efforts, tell you that you are doing everything wrong, or deliberately create conflict around your routines. So create an internal space where your wellness belongs to you. Let some of your progress remain private and personal if that helps protect your peace. Even after the relationship ends, the old voices may not disappear immediately. The person may be gone while the conditioning remains. You may still hear the voice telling you that resting is selfish or that spending time on yourself is wrong. You may feel guilty for having needs or struggle to believe that your well-being deserves attention. That takes time to change. Sometimes the most important wellness change is not a new diet or exercise routine, but breaking away from toxic patterns when you safely can. Compared with the ongoing strain of manipulation, an occasional missed workout or unhealthy meal is a much smaller concern. Self-care can deteriorate slowly rather than through one dramatic decision. You postpone one appointment, then another, because you are exhausted or dealing with someone else's demands. You stop exercising because your mind is overwhelmed, and sleep becomes difficult because you cannot stop ruminating. You eat whatever is easiest because planning feels impossible. You stop doing activities that once made you feel good. Eventually, the way you care for yourself can become almost unrecognizable. That gradual erosion can have serious consequences when routine healthcare, nutrition, sleep, movement, and other basic needs are continually pushed aside. Someone consumed by an unpredictable partner may repeatedly postpone medical appointments. Another person may become so exhausted by nights of rumination that important health routines are forgotten. Someone else may become so hopeless and isolated that caring for themselves begins to feel pointless. They may neglect nutrition, movement, preventive care, or other everyday habits. That hopelessness can be one of the most damaging effects of prolonged emotional abuse. People may also turn toward unhealthy coping behaviors because immediate relief feels more important than long-term consequences. This is why self-care has to include real health maintenance, not just occasional relaxation or spa-like activities. Health-related self-care includes keeping medical appointments and following appropriate treatment plans. It includes dental and vision care, recommended screenings, prescriptions, nutrition, hydration, physical activity, and adequate sleep. It also includes everyday safety and finding healthier ways to manage stress. When someone is living with narcissistic abuse, even these basic tasks can become difficult. Delaying healthcare can mean missing opportunities to address problems earlier. Ignoring long-term health habits can gradually affect overall well-being. But beneath all of this is a painful psychological message. You may begin believing that your health simply isn't important enough to deserve attention. A narcissistic partner may focus intensely on their own health while remaining indifferent to yours. They may track their own appointments, appearance, routines, or longevity while showing little interest in what you need. When your self-care inconveniences them, they may complain about the time, money, transportation, or childcare involved. You may keep hoping that someday they will understand and finally become supportive. But you cannot build your health strategy around that hope. You need to find ways to have your own back instead of waiting for someone else to take responsibility for your well-being. Your health cannot depend entirely on whether another person decides your needs are worthwhile. So what can you do when the relationship makes self-care difficult? Find workarounds that reduce the obstacles between you and the behavior you want to maintain. Use alarms if medication is difficult to remember. Put appointments on your calendar and arrange transportation ahead of time when possible. Explore telehealth when appropriate and find small opportunities for movement that fit your circumstances. Exercise at home if getting to a gym creates conflict. Walk when you can, and connect healthy choices to routines you already have. The principle is simple. Make healthy behaviors easier to complete. When you are already carrying the mental burden of narcissistic abuse, reducing the number of decisions you must make can make a meaningful difference. You also need support. If formal therapy or an organized support group is not available, supportive people who understand narcissistic abuse can still provide valuable connection. Find people who do not require you to constantly explain why the relationship is difficult. A small circle of people who understand the struggle can make a major difference. You can encourage one another to walk, remember appointments, create simple health goals, or simply spend time together without judgment. Therapy can also help because the deeper work is not only about creating a schedule of healthy habits. It is about understanding what makes self-care trigger guilt, why you ruminate, why you feel exhausted, and why your needs can feel undeserving of attention. Remember, unlike a car, you only get one body. Think about people who wish they had treated their health differently when they were younger. Health is cumulative, and small decisions made over years can build upon one another. You do not have to become perfect overnight. Every small decision to care for yourself is an investment in the person you will become. Chronic relational stress can also affect how you feel physically, contributing to tension, headaches, muscle discomfort, exhaustion, disrupted sleep, and other stress-related experiences. Taking care of your body while creating distance from a harmful relationship can help you regain some strength. If you eventually create more distance from the relationship or leave it altogether, use that change as an opportunity to rebuild your relationship with yourself. You may have spent years responding to someone else's needs, so begin asking different questions. What do I need? What makes me feel safe, strong, and like myself again? What activities, people, routines, and choices reconnect me with who I am? There is also another form of self-care worth considering. Sometimes you do not need a permanent escape immediately. Sometimes you need a genuine break from the emotional demands. In caregiving situations, there is a concept called respite care. A caregiver receives temporary support so they can step away, rest, recover, and return with more capacity. People dealing with narcissistic abuse may not technically be caregivers, yet they can still spend enormous energy providing reassurance, managing emotions, preventing conflict, and maintaining another person's sense of importance. That emotional labor can become exhausting. There is no standard service that simply arrives and says, "Go take a break, we'll handle this." So you may need to create your own version of respite. It can be a place where your reality is respected, your voice is heard, and you are not constantly required to manage someone else's emotions. Imagine a space where you are not minimized or gaslighted, a place where someone listens without turning the conversation back toward themselves, a place where you can laugh, relax, try something new, eat without criticism, and sleep without someone deliberately creating conflict. It could be time with trusted friends, a safe overnight stay, a long drive where you choose the music, or a meal at a restaurant you enjoy. You decide what you eat, what you watch, when you sleep, and whether you want to talk or simply be quiet. It does not need to be extravagant. It only needs to give you some experience of control over your own time again. That experience can remind you that your life does not have to revolve around another person's demands. If you know someone recovering from narcissistic abuse, you can help create that space for them. Offer to watch their children for a few hours, care for their pet, or give them a safe opportunity to leave the house. Spend time with them without turning the conversation toward yourself. Let them decide what they want to do, and most importantly, listen. Even visiting family can become emotionally exhausting for someone dealing with narcissistic abuse within their family of origin. Sometimes simply accompanying that person can make a difficult situation easier. you can help carry some of the emotional burden and remind them that they are not imagining what they are experiencing. But respite is not a cure. Eventually, a person may have to return to the same home, family, workplace, or complicated circumstances. That is okay, because the purpose of respite is not to permanently eliminate the problem. Its purpose is to restore some capacity. It gives someone enough breathing room to think more clearly, regain strength, remember who they are, and become more capable of protecting themselves. Over time, those moments of restoration may support stronger boundaries and gradual disengagement from a manipulative environment. Respite does not have to happen once in a lifetime. It can be a few hours each week, once a month, or whenever circumstances safely allow. Consistency matters more than extravagance. When someone is being worn down by an emotionally destructive relationship, regular moments of restoration can preserve the strength needed to keep moving forward. Respite is not selfish. It is restoration and maintenance. If you feel completely depleted, ask yourself what your version of respite could be. Where could you go? Who could you trust? What would you do if nobody criticized your choices? And what would you stop doing? What would it feel like to have a few hours where your life belongs entirely to you? Those questions can be surprisingly powerful because they reconnect you with choices that may have disappeared under years of emotional pressure. Survivors of narcissistic abuse are often told they are simply in a difficult relationship. But the psychological burden can be far more complicated than that. Constant self-monitoring is exhausting. Repeated invalidation can change how you see yourself. And being unable to leave immediately can make moments of relief even more important. You do not always need another lecture about discipline or another perfect wellness routine. Sometimes you need someone to understand how hard it is to care for yourself after years of being taught that your needs are a problem. So start wherever you can. One appointment, one walk, one glass of water, one healthy meal, one night of better rest, or one supportive conversation. One small act of protecting your peace can be the beginning of rebuilding yourself. If you are still inside the relationship, do not measure your recovery by somebody else's wellness checklist. Your first goal may simply be psychological survival. Then comes stabilization, then restoration, and then, when possible, rebuilding. You do not have to become the healthiest version of yourself overnight. You just need to begin making small choices that remind you that you still exist outside of the narcissistic person's demands. Your life is not only about managing someone else's emotions, and your identity is not defined by how useful you are to another person. Your worth does not depend on how little you need, and taking care of yourself is not selfishness. It is one way of returning to yourself.
So if you are recovering from narcissistic abuse,
Remember this. You don't need perfection. You need safety. You need support. You need room to breathe. You need people who believe you and opportunities to rest. You need permission to slowly rebuild the parts of yourself that you had to suppress in order to survive. The ultimate goal is not a flawless wellness routine. It is reclaiming your relationship with yourself and creating enough distance from manipulation to hear your own voice again. If you have ideas about what respite care could look like for someone recovering from narcissistic abuse, share them, because another person may read your idea and realize they can create breathing room too. Sometimes survivors do not need to try harder. Sometimes they simply need a break and a safe place to begin returning to themselves.
but like I said, when it comes to other mental health situations or physical health situations, we're so invested in helping caregivers anywhere we can, in any way we can. But we don't think about that with survivors of narcissistic abuse. We often just paint it as, oh, that's just a tough relationship. It's a lot more than that. And people in these relationships, especially when they can't get out of them, which is a lot of folks, every so often, you just need a break. Thanks again.